Good afternoon, everyone. It's Cadet Rump again, and welcome back to our Forged in Fire podcast. Before we get started, I'd like to give a special thank you to Cadet Justin Venencia for being my Zoom coordinator this semester and doing a phenomenal job and helping us out. But today, we have a very special guest. We have Mr. Hill, who is a Green Beret veteran and weapons sergeant from the 3rd Special Forces Group. But I won't say much on him. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Mr. Hill, the floor is yours.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. Thank you, Dave, and congratulations on your upcoming graduation and soon to be commissioning. So thanks, guys, and the Steel Battalion for doing this. I think it's a great opportunity for guys and men and women who have served to maybe kind of give you some insight as to some of the things that we've dealt with, but also maybe some of the things that we hope to see in the future as well. I spent 10 years in the Army. I actually, from a pretty early age, I want to say junior high, maybe knew that I wanted to be in the Army and I wanted to be in special operations. In fact, when it came time to go to the recruiter, I went to the recruiter and said I wanted infantry, and then he asked me how many years I wanted to sign for, and I said, well, 20. And of course, he laughed at me and said, you can't do that. You don't even know if you're going to like it. And but I guess the most of that time for infantry was 4, so I signed up for 4 years, and I loved it, and it was a good time for me. But life changes, things change. Get married, start having kids. And so I only did 10 years, but I had a blast doing it. And, it's not always easy, a lot of deployments, a lot of missed time. And, but there's everything about it that I would do today again. Everything I've learned, I've applied to business. I own my own business. I have a partner. We've been in business for 12 years. We work for commercial banks and surety bond companies. And the things that I learned in not just infantry, but special operations, I applied to business as well. And I remember somebody asking me before I entered, right out of high school, before I went into the Army, somebody asked me, why don't you learn a skill? Why don't you get into something that you learn how to, use computers or, some other type of skill that you can use in the civilian world? That just was, to me, such a foreign concept. Why would I go in the Army and do something that I can do in the civilian world? I want to go and do something that I can't do anywhere else. I want to go and do these things. And the funny thing about it is I still use a lot of those skills in business. Reconnaissance, what's that? Well, that's finding prospects, it's finding new business. Doing taking that intelligence and then acting upon it, that's finding a new client. So, and then kicking in the doors, doing the raid. I mean, outside of kicking in the door and pulling triggers, not doing that, but it's the same kind of things and disciplines that you need to have to do those things. So.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. That's awesome. Again, it's a pleasure to see you and have you on. Thank you for everything. Today we have a great amount of questions for you to talk about what your time was like in the military when you joined up during your serving. So for many of you, we may know that today's topic is leadership in a combat environment. Mr. Hill, being that you served, you started out in the infantry and eventually made your way into the special forces. We're going to talk a little bit about that and see how that goes. All right.
So special forces is they came out of World War II, out of what was called the OSS, the Office of Strategic Service. The CIA also came out of there after World War II. And in special forces, we work in 12-man teams known as ODAs, or Operational Detachment Alphas. What we do is we take the 4 basic specialties that, or 4 basic disciplines that each infantry soldier should know, which is weapons, communications, first aid, and let's call it demolition. And we specialize in those areas and become you know, specialists in each and every one of those things. So while an average infantry soldier, he'll know, his M4A2, he'll know an M240 Bravo, an M249, and then the 11 Charlies will know the mortars as well, and then the 11 hotels will know the heavy weapon systems like the TOW missile system, 50 cal, and the Mark 19. In Special Forces, as a weapons specialist, you're trained on every weapon known to NATO. That's including our allies' weapons and our enemies' weapons. You know how to repair these things, not just in the field, but also make field modifications. You know how to implement them, and then if needed for the mission you're going to do, you draw out of what's called the SOF inventory, Special Operations Force inventory, whatever you might need to complete your mission. So you, as a weapons specialist, that's what we do. The communication specialists, same thing. Every piece of communication gear that they utilize, and also foreign communication gear. The medical specialists, the 18 Deltas, are very, very specialized in what they do. They are specializing in trauma technicians, and it's taking it on a whole nother level of the training that these guys have to go through. It's actually the longest training out of all the different disciplines. The engineers, they are often referred to as the demo guys. Well, it kind of dumbs down what they do. They are called engineers, and the things that they work in explosives like a brain surgeon works, does their work. It's amazing some of the stuff that they can do. And they're often, I know some individuals who have come up with different ways of, say, for instance, breaching steel doors, using shape charges with IV bags that have rewritten in the manuals of how we do certain things. They're very highly skilled. From that, then you will be assigned to a group, and each group, Special Forces group, is, they specialize in a certain area of the world. And so you'll go to language school, you'll learn the language or languages that you need to know to communicate in those areas. And those groups, because you specialize in those areas of the world, you'll often be working there. In fact, if there's conflict that breaks out in a certain area of the world, it's not uncommon or not unheard of that we might actually have a team or two already there. So from that, selection, being selected for this, there is a method to the madness. There is a formula. They're looking for physical toughness, they're looking for mental toughness, and they're looking for physical ability, really. And then also there's a psychological evaluation side of that, where they're looking for men who can compartmentalize, who can, they're wired a certain way. And it's, from my understanding, it's a 1% of even the male population who are in the military are wired this way. And you're usually drawn to special operations in the military if you have this kind of wiring. Not that so I'm sure it's not foolproof, but there's a whole system to what they're doing. It's not just about trying to break someone. If the program was about breaking people, well, I mean, anybody can design a program that can do that, and everybody will eventually get to their breaking point. But it's about finding that person who stands out, who can turn off their brain, who knows how to compartmentalize things, and it naturally are compartmentalizing things. I remember a guy twisted his ankle pretty badly, and the first thing he did was call for a medic, and versus another guy who had a hernia and something else was wrong with him. I can't remember, who didn't, call for a medic. In fact, it was the medics who, after several days, told him, hey, you need to stop, or you're going to do further damage to yourself. That's the person we're kind of looking for, because when you're deployed out in somewhere, it's going to be you and your teammates. And usually you're not going to have a whole lot of support with you. So you have to be able to go through those times and be able to, I hate to use the term suck up, but sometimes that's what you have to do. And you're looking for that kind of person.
That's a great overview, Mr. Hill. You said they were for Green Beret. They look for people who they're mentally tough, physically tough. Can you talk about what is it like when you are trying to go through the process of getting to the Q course, and once you're there, and what's that pipeline like from all the way through selection through getting to your first team, how, like a timeline for that?
So, it's interesting. After going through selection, all that means is that you could be standing at the end of selection, and selection has changed since I've been there. It was 4 weeks for me. I think now it's up to 6 weeks, somewhere around there. You could be still standing there at the end of the day and not get selected. Again, there's a whole makeup of things that they're looking for. After that, again, selection is just an invite to come down and then now go through the training. And it's interesting how some guys show up and they think, okay, I did the hard part. Now I'm here, I'm at the Q course. I'm gonna, it's just all about learning and being trained. And no, it's like day one all over again. And, that's again, another psychological kind of effect. Like you think you made it and you really didn't yet. It's changed a lot over the years. When I went through, you had to have at least be a specialist. You had to have so many years before you could even go to selection. As a team commander, for instance, you can't go unless you're a captain or I think an E2 promotable, or sorry, O2 promotable to captain to be a team commander. Around, I think it was 2002, they created a program where it's called the 18 X-ray program, where you could come in off the street, sign up, and have a contract to go to basic training, airborne school. Then you went to a pre-selection to get you ready for selection, then a selection, and so forth. And I think there were some problems with that. I know a lot of guys like myself and some of the older guys didn't like that because the whole point of Special Forces is we want a more mature soldier. We're looking for somebody who has some time under their belt and they're not just right off the street. So there were some modifications to that. And I'm not sure exactly when they made them, but from my understanding now is if you have a 4-year degree, you can get a contract. In fact, recently I was working with a gentleman who did a few years in the NFL and got out and then was wanting to get into the Army and wanted to do this, and just kind of training him, teaching him land navigation and so forth. And he was able to get an 18 X-ray contract. So it's really changed. And some of that, I think, was because they felt like they were losing guys. For instance, Chris Kyle. I don't know if you ever heard of Chris Kyle. He was a SEAL. He, in his book, he even talks about how he went to the Army recruiter, wanted to be a Green Beret. And of course, they said, you just can't walk in here and do that. But hey, you ever heard of the Rangers? And he said no, but then on the way out, I guess the Navy recruiter got a hold of him. And so, that's part of the reason why they created this. So if, they're still trying to get a more mature soldier applying, but it's opened that up. As far as training, I mean, I'll give you an example, like 18 Deltas is like a year, or I'm sorry, like 2 years for them, maybe about a year and a half was my training. It's a long program, but there's so much that you're learning. And, again, it goes even beyond, for instance, in my discipline of weapons, it goes into how do you work with, because you're going to be working with foreign leaders. And when I say leaders, they're warlords, or they're leaders in their area, a tribal area. How do you work with them? How are you going to deal with a situation like, for instance, a humanitarian issue, or a human rights violation when, here's this guy, he's got 100 men of his own, they're armed. You are working with them because he's serving you a lot of intelligence and helping you with the common issue, which is, let's say Al-Qaeda as an example in the old days of Afghanistan. And yet you witness a human rights violation by this person. What do? Do you come in there and start spouting off about how you're going to report them? For doing a human rights violation while you're sitting there breaking bread with the guy. I mean, he's more out to, at a very minimum, you're going to ruin the relationship, but probably say who you're going to report this to, because I think you have to tell somebody, and you're in my place right now, and I have this place surrounded. So you have to learn how to play the game, and that's something that's taught to you through the process. And it's interesting. Ambassadors are working in different countries for the United States. The Secretary of State, these people are negotiating policies with other countries and their governments. And yet in special operations, special forces, you're often in the same situation, but you're in the granular level. You're working with the local chieftain, the local leader of a tribe, where they may not even recognize the government of the country where they live. I'll go back to Afghanistan. The Pashtuns don't look at the Afghan government as being their government. Their laws, they're governed by Pashtunwali. So, they could care less what policies we're making with the Afghan government. So here it is, you got, a handful of Americans that at the very granular level are coming up with, policies and treaties, if you will, and how we're going to work with each other and sharing of intelligence. And it's very actionable and it's very mobile, if you will. The big government ambassadors and those policies, they're huge freight trains that take forever to take off. And this is at the people's level, and to some degree, you could say there's more power in it. So you have to, part of the process, again, going back to selection and the whole process in general, is looking for people who have a high level of patriotism, a high level of morality, character, honor, believe in these things. And so when you're out there in the field, you can handle a responsibility. Sometimes you have tons of American cash on you, as an example. It's just, having the level of integrity is huge. And again, it goes back to what they're looking for, in this.
Definitely a long process for sure. And I like how you talked about the level of integrity that each Green Beret must have. Can you talk about how the missions are separated? What makes the Green Berets different from other SF units? What's a reason that the Green Berets might be called in as opposed to Army Rangers?
So special operations is really what I think you're trying to say. The unit is actually called Special Forces. So Army Special Forces, that's actually what we're called. Then you have the Green Berets, and you have Delta, which came out in the late 70s out of Special Forces and Rangers. Then you have SEALs, and then the SEALs have their version of Delta, which would be SEAL Team 6. Again, sometimes everything's evolving over time as missions are needed or change. Again, Special Forces, we are highly specialized in a certain area of the world. So Afghanistan, as an example, who are the first teams in Afghanistan? The Special Forces group teams, because that's, the Middle East is their area of operation. So the first teams in there were all fifth group teams. Then followed by, third group, and then, every group will send teams over there for the combat experience and so forth. But that's who you want there first. The Rangers, one of their primary missions is airfield seizure. They train on that a lot, but obviously that's not something they do a lot of. What they do a lot of, and right now only do, is direct action missions. They do the reconnaissance side and things like that. But the Rangers work in platoon size elements. They're sort of, I would define them as sort of the strong arm of special operations, and are often utilized by SEALs and Delta and Special Forces for backup, coming in. In fact, one of my PLs growing up, he was Charlie Company, 2nd Ranger Regiment, Second Ranger Battalion. He led the Ranger mission to rescue Marcus Luttrell. So as an example, and of course that group also had, there were some Green Berets on that team, or on that mission. I think there was a couple of SEALs on that mission too, but the primary group were Rangers. The Special Forces are utilized because we can specialize in certain, we know the language, we know the cultures of people that we might be working with. We can go in and develop, our missions include several different things. As an example, foreign and internal defense, counterterrorism, counter-guerrilla warfare. That's what we really do. Direct action missions, special reconnaissance missions, counter-proliferation missions. It's not just doing direct action. We can go in and create guerrilla forces to fight the common enemy. So for instance, in Vietnam, you had special forces teams that went in and were working with the Montagnards, which is a native people that lived in the mountains. And they trained them on how to fight, and they created these guerrilla forces to go and then fight and strike against the Viet Cong. And when it comes to warfare, the guerrilla warfare, knowing how to do that, or insurgency, is very powerful. Conventional militaries, and I'll speak about the Army for example. The Army is huge, and it really is. You really do have to respect the people who are in charge of the logistics of mobilizing and getting units overseas, into combat zones, because there's so many different moving parts. Special Forces, we're small. Our teams are small. We can get in and out and go into places faster than a conventional infantry unit can spin up and get in. And like I said earlier, we're oftentimes already working in those areas already and already have people on the ground. So that's kind of, I hope maybe I answered that question, for you, but that's sort of the short of it.
Oh, that was spot on. You mentioned that you guys specialize in languages. For 3rd Special Forces Group, what type of languages did you guys have to learn?
So they work a lot in Afghanistan now, but also in the continent of Africa and in the Caribbean. For me, I had spent some time in the 5th Group, and so mine was Arabic, and learning mainly Eastern Arabic, and then I had to learn different dialects, Pashtun and so forth, Dari and Farsi. Then I went over to 3rd to try to help them. It was after 9/11, they were taking over Afghanistan, so then 5th could gear up for Iraq. And so I was really helping them and trying to get in with those teams. So for me, it was a little bit different experience, but for them, there's several different languages that they would be focused on. They do a lot of work in Africa, Tanzania, Somalia, a lot on the eastern side of Africa, but specifically, Swahili and things like that.
How's your Arabic and Swahili now?
Not very good. It's funny, when I got out, I was a lifer, and my buddies all were surprised that I was hanging it up, and And most guys, when they get out, they then go and work for the CIA. You know, we call it going in the back door because we work so closely with the CIA to begin with that, you know, that's a natural thing, or State Department, or work for some alphabet agency, you know, as we call them, or maybe do work for a security contractor. And all those things I was thinking about doing. But ultimately, I'm like one of the few guys who doesn't then go and use their language skills somewhere, or other skills somewhere. I decided to, you know, get in the civilian world and get into business. And I do try to stay up on it, but it's hard. You know, when I was in, we would watch soap operas. We would try and find soap operas that, you know, come from the Middle East to kind of, you know, you're watching and you're immersing yourself in the culture, and you're trying to listen and stay with it. And today it's, you know, that's tough. I don't really have time to sit down and watch soap operas, even if I know the language. So the staying with is tough.
That's awesome. It's clear that special forces are highly trained, highly disciplined unit with a lot of history behind them. And from a leader's perspective, preparation is definitely key. And for you, you were a weapons sergeant. So can you speak on how would you prepare yourself and your team before going out on a mission?
So that's an interesting question because, you know, before you even get to what we call the ISOFAC, or the isolation facility, to plan a mission, it starts long before that. It starts before you get on the C-17 or whatever aircraft you're taking, before you take a step onto the tarmac to leave, to go where you're going. It starts by spending thousands of hours, you know, at the range, in the shoot house, you know, coming home and your thighs are smoked from your shooting, you know, from standing in your shooting stance all day. It comes from spending thousands of hours cross training with your teammates. You know, it's weapons. I'm not the only one. And by the way, there's two of us on every team. So there's two weapons specialists. There's two of every discipline. And that way you can split the team into six, and then you can go further if you need to, mission dependent. It's about cross training. It's spending hundreds of hours cross training with your 18 Deltas, your Charlies, your Echoes, understanding the communications and how to work with, you know, the demolition and the other stuff that they're going to be using, and vice versa, and cross training them. It's putting in extra PT. It's putting in the extra time and effort, taking home manuals of equipment that maybe you have to, or you're going to be starting to use, so that you can get a full understanding of what you're working with. It's taking time and studying dossiers of maybe targets and things like that you might be studying, and where the people that you're going to be going into. I mean, I remember after 9/11, I went and I got a book called, I think it's called The Bear Went Over the Mountain. It's about the Russian military in Afghanistan. And, you know, it's just getting in and wanting to know and understanding those things. It's, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm stealing book titles, but there's no easy day, you know, and there you go. Boom, I stole a book title. But that's true. You know, making it on a team, that's not where it ends. That's kind of where the heavy lifting for you starts. You're trying to become an asset to your teammates, not a liability. And you want them to know that you're an asset. They want to know that they can depend on you. So all these things you do on your own, at home, extra time at work, it's so that, you know, yeah, you're becoming better, and maybe you're working on things on your extra time that maybe you don't do as well. So you do those things, or as well as you should. So your teammates know that they can depend on you, and vice versa. I want to know that I can depend on every single one of my teammates, because they put in extra time. I coach soccer, and I always tell the kids that I coach, you know, listen, I could be the greatest coach in the world. I'm not. But I could be the greatest coach in the world, but I'm telling you right now, if you show up to practice twice a week for an hour and a half each time, and then game day on Saturday or Sunday, and the only time you've touched a soccer ball was at practice or on game day, you're never going to be a better player. you have to put in the extra time and energy, be working out, if you want to be better and elite. So that's what it really comes down to. Before you even step foot inside or take a look at planning a mission, it's knowing and understanding and having a thorough understanding of everything you do. To this day, sometimes when I'm getting ready in the morning, while I'm staring at the mirror, I might practice pulling my secondary weapon out, and doing a draw in the mirror from either my thigh holster, from, my back, just practicing and looking at my form and making sure my form is still good. I to this day, I open doors with my left hand because it's my non-firing hand. And it's just in my DNA that, if I'm holding my daughter in my left hand, sometimes I have to tell myself, if I'm opening a door, like, hey, right hand, it's just, that's in my DNA, and that's how it should be. So it's that kind of level. That's the preparation. And I'm glad you used the word preparation, because we have a saying that, you can't be ready, but you can be prepared. And your level of preparedness matters. If your level of preparedness is, well, you went to the range a little bit, so you know a little bit about your weapon. You you used the radio one time. These things matter, and that's what leads to success on the battlefield. Being able to, maneuver your team, and they can depend on you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you talked that a typical team consists of 12 soldiers. Can you talk just briefly on the specialties? I know you're saying there was 2 specialties on each team. Can you talk about each specialty on a team?
Right. So, kind of went over this a little bit earlier. So you have 2 weapon specialists. You have 2 engineer specialists or sergeants. And they're, again, sometimes we call them demo experts, but that kind of dumbs down their level of expertise with demolitions and other things. You have 2 medical specialists or sergeants, the 18 deltas. And then you have 2 commo. And then from there, then you have your team sergeant, who is usually what we call, his designator is After Fox, and he's the intelligence sergeant on the team. Then you have the team XO, who is a warrant officer, and then you have the team commander, which is a captain. The team commander, at best, might spend 2 years on a team if he's lucky, and then we'll move on into other areas. I've actually known some team commanders, some guys who resigned their commission and then became an NCO because they wanted to continue being an operator. They loved doing that work. And in fact, in my big grand scheme of things, when I was younger and thinking I was going to be in for at least 20 years, my thought was at some point I was going to, do a green to gold kind of thing, and, do college and then green to gold while I'm in and become an officer. But I started to see, for me, that wasn't something I was going to like, because I liked doing the job. I liked being in there, especially in special forces, being an operator and doing that work. So, like I said, I've seen guys resign their commission because they want to keep doing the job. Is that good? Not necessarily, because you want to see that experience move on up into the next level in special forces, and but it's you got to love what you do, and if you're not going to love the next level, so it's up to them. But so that's sort of the team makeup. There's 2 of every discipline, and then again you have the team sergeant, who the team sergeant might be any one of those specialties himself. And then, like I said, the XO is a warrant officer. And I often thought, had I stayed in, I've kind of kicked around the thought that maybe I would have gone the warrant officer route myself for special forces. But
So you spent 10 years in with military experience. What did you learn later in your career about leadership that you wish you would have known earlier when you first enlisted or at a younger age?
That's a good question. You know, I, I didn't learn it much later, but I did learn it when I was a young leader. Um, it's that not everybody responds to the same things that made you motivated or that made you thrive. You could have 10 people and have 10 different personalities of, you know, what motivates this guy or how you can get people to do different things, especially difficult things. Um, you know, I learned that as a very young leader. Wish I had known it when I was private. You know, when I was a private, I had a section leader and a squad leader who were always making me push, you know, do push-ups. In my platoon, I was the, you know, I think I was a E2, and no, I was an E1 when I got there, and everybody was above me was a specialist. So when stuff rolled downhill, it like fell off a cliff and hit me. And their their motivation, you know, they were trying to keep me on my toes, and it worked for me. Like I thrived in that. I remember some sergeant in one of the platoons said, you know, Bill, you're the most push-upping guy in this company. And I looked at it like, well, I'm just getting stronger, you know, and these guys are just keeping me on my toes. But that's what worked for me, and I liked it, and I thrived in that. But when I became, you know, I came home from Ranger School and immediately was made a section leader, and my platoon sergeant came up and said, you know, I'm going to give you this guy over here. His name is Edwards, and he's going to be your leadership challenge. And I guess he had been moved from 2 different platoons, and I was now his third, and kind of like if I couldn't do something with him, I guess we were kicking him out. And I quickly learned that this guy, you know, he was disrespectful. Um, he uh, he didn't always show up on time, you know, or if he did show up, like his uniform looked like it, you know, was hit by a wrinkle gun, you know. And so one day I was sitting there, and I had him for several weeks. We'd been to the into the field and ranges and things like that with him. And so my platoon sergeant came in one day, and I was sitting there writing a counseling statement. And he asked me, you know, what I was doing, and I said, you know, I feel like I'm writing a counseling statement for this guy every day. I feel like it's all I do. And you know, I explained some of the things that I'm struggling with. And to me, everybody should react to things like I did, you know, especially when I was a private. You know, I didn't talk back, or I didn't, you know, make a snide remark. I didn't, you know, and so my platoon sergeant, he said, you know, let me ask you something. Which soldier would you rather have? You know, Soldier A, he shows up every day on time. His PT is good. You know, he doesn't max it, but he's, you know, in the 90s. He shows up, his uniform is pristine, you know, his spit shined. He knows Army regulations by heart. He knows all the field manuals by heart. He knows all this stuff. But when you take him out in the field and you're doing the work, he is an absolute failure at it. He cannot operate. He can't do the work well. Or he just doesn't do it well. The cold affects him. You know, being wet and cold affects him. Or Soldier B, who sometimes you get a call that, hey, guess what? He needs picked up because he's down at the local jail because he got in a fight at the local bar, or he got, you know, in trouble because he did donuts in the front yard of the commanding general. He shows up with, you know, mud on his boots, and his, you know, again, his uniform is terrible, or sometimes like, but he maxes out his PT test. And when you go and take him to the field, he shines. It's where he thrives. That's what he is. And, you know, he does his best work out there. Which one do you want? And I said, yeah, I want B. You know, and he said, exactly. What we should be looking for are leaders, or excuse me, what we should be looking for are warriors. Everybody is a warrior. You know, you're going to branch, artillery, I think, right?
Yes, Mr. Hill.
Sorry about that, but, you know, we got to have artillery. Everybody is first and foremost a warrior. And you should think about that with your, you know, it doesn't matter what you're branching or what your MOS is. I don't care if you're going to be an accountant working in AJ Row, pushing, you know, papers around and doing tax filings for soldiers that, you know, for tax season. You're first and foremost warriors. And you need to remember that. So looking past those things, he helped me realize, okay, sometimes, you got to look the other way, just kind of being detail oriented is important. Having a uniform that's pristine, those are details that are part of being disciplined. Yes. But first and foremost is we're looking for warriors. Um, Leading by example. I actually learned that from a young, age, but that, I had leaders that every single one of my leadership, my platoon sergeant was, maxing out the 18 to 21 PT test standard. I mean, he's asking us to do it. Well, he does it himself, and he was, probably 40 at the time. That's the kind of thing that you need to be bringing to the table. You need to lead by example, and your people need to know that you do lead by example. And when they know that, it builds an esprit de corps that is rock solid. I'll give you an example. Going back to the warrior side of things, there is a reason why there's an Army dentist who in World War II received the Medal of Honor posthumously. And it wasn't for pulling teeth in a combat zone in the South Pacific. Okay, I'll let you guys do the research, look that up on your own. It's a good story, but it wasn't for pulling teeth. It was, and he's the only dentist to have ever received the Medal of Honor, by the way. It was for stacking bodies, and he did. And he helped save a lot of men because of what he did. Jessica Lynch, Iraq 2003. She's in a supply unit. They take her convoy takes a wrong turn. They end up getting ambushed, and everyone is killed except for her. She's badly wounded, and I actually knew some of the guys that were on the mission that rescued her. I don't know what was in her mind when she, went to Iraq. Was she thinking, well, I'm just a supply clerk and I'm not ever going to get into combat? I don't know. I hope not. I hope that unit trained and thought, hey, warrior first, supply second. But that's exactly what happened. And, going into the leadership side of things, the Rangers that were sent to recover the bodies of her colleagues that were killed, they were all buried in shallow graves, I believe in a soccer field, if I remember right. It was a gruesome task. And the sergeants, the NCOs of the Rangers that were on that mission, they decided that they were going to do that job. They were going to do the grisly job of digging up these bodies and recovering them while they let their lower enlisted, pull security while they did that. They didn't want them to have to see that, that part of, not humanity, but that part of war, if you will. But that takes leaders, knowing that your leaders would do what they're asking you to do and could do it just as good as you, if not better. That means something. I like Patton quotes because Patton was a soldier. He wasn't a politician. And it got him in trouble. It would often get Patton in trouble because he would tell you what he thought and he wasn't afraid to say it. But he had a saying, it was never tell people how to do things. Tell them what needs to be done and then be amazed by their ingenuity. So in other words, I may have a certain technique of doing something and you might have a certain technique of doing something. What does it matter if at the end of the day, we both end up with the same result and they're both efficient ways of doing it. There's nothing wrong. Yours is just as good as mine. Let me see what you can do. And that's his point there is, listen, don't sit there as a leader and constantly micromanage people. And that's kind of what I was doing with Edwards. I'm the over his shoulder micromanaging. When you're over somebody's shoulder, you're going to find something to complain about. You're going to find something that they messed up on. And you need to step back, allow them to kind of amaze you with how they do things. Or maybe not. Maybe you do need to step on them and change what they're doing because it's not right. But going back to your people and getting to know them, that don't let that be something you start to learn in a combat zone. Get to know the people, the men and women in your unit that are under you that you are in charge of long before you ever leave the country. Understand where they came from, what their background is, what their hobbies are. Know them. It's important. And the more you do that, the more respect they have for you.
That's actually a great connector to my next question. You talked much about your platoon sergeant leading by example, and your squad leader that was making you push and do push-ups all the time, then Patton. My next question would be, who are some mentors that you have had along your way, whether they were in the military or even in the civilian world, and what made them a good mentor to you?
Well, again, I'll go back to my platoon sergeant, Joe Gilbert. And I call him Joe because he won SF2, so we go by first name basis. But Sergeant First Class Joe Gilbert, he's the one who reminded me, warriors first, warriors first. You know, we're not rifle flippers. We're not, you know, you will be amazed at the military's ability to, especially in time of peace, to come up with things that don't matter. You know, don't. You know, I'll give you an example. Uniforms. Back in the day, you know, we wore BDUs and DCUs, and our field, we had different uniforms. We had field uniforms. Our field uniforms, obviously, they were the ones that were a little more beat up. Right? You're not wearing something that starched, but we would take the pockets off of our chest, and there was pockets also on your stomach. You're absolutely useless in combat because you're wearing, you know, your plate carrier, your chest rig. You can't use them. So all of our field uniforms were modified, where we would take the pockets and put them on our arms. Makes sense, right? You know, in the conventional army, the military in general, no, it was all about, you know, looking uniform and name tapes that were, you know, parallel to the ground and things like that. And the other thing was we used Velcro for things. So the uniforms you have today are uniforms that came out of looking at the uniforms that we would wear and how we would modify things. Now, if I was back on base and I was going down to AG row or something, I would put on a regular uniform and you know, go in there with that. But luckily, in the early 2000s, the Army and really the military as a whole started looking at the uniforms that we use in combat and saying, oh, that makes sense. Let's put pockets where you can use them. And that, you know, that made sense. Again, you know, in time of peace, the military sometimes somebody comes along with a harebrained idea and it's about stuff that is unrelated to developing warriors and creating a high level of lethality or maintaining a high level of lethality. It's a focus that, you know, is not important. My next mentor would be my PL that I had. Again, he's now a colonel. He will probably be a Joint Chiefs staff someday. He is a hard charger. He played football for West Point, was a very big guy. In fact, we used to do a thing in our platoon where we would dogpile you. Didn't matter who you were or what rank you were. At some point, we were going to dogpile you, and we usually waited until you weren't expecting something. And we tried to do that with him, and that didn't work out very well. He's a hard charger, and he has had a great career of being in great positions at certain times of his career. Like I said, he helped lead the Rangers on the mission to rescue Marcus Luttrell. The thing about him was he's humble, very humble, but he's the first that'll tell you, you know what, I can learn from you. I probably learn as much from you as you can from me. And that's important because there are some NCOs and there are some officers out there who kind of view themselves as they should know or do know more than the people who are below them, people that they outrank. And the reality of that is, you know, people come from different backgrounds. Maybe, you know, you have a private who came from growing up on a farm, and here you are out in the back 40 and one of your vehicles breaks down for some reason. You don't have, you know, the mechanic with you, but the guy knows something about mechanics because he grew up on a farm, you know, and here it is, you have an NCO who is looking at him like, what do you know? You're just a private kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's across the board, but you see that sometimes. Wanting to learn from your people, sometimes their background brings something to the table and it can be important. It's going back to special forces. It's why in mission planning, sometimes the person planning the mission isn't the team commander. Sometimes, first of all, the team sergeants, the sergeants in the team, they run the team because they have the most time in the team, and usually have the most experience too. So sometimes the guy planning a mission might be the one who has the most experience in that particular maybe infill method, or area, whatever it may be. He might be in charge of planning. So yeah, so I would say him. I had the pleasure several years ago at a Ranger Hall of Fame to meet some of the last surviving members of Merrill's Marauders. I met the first Black Rangers. They also did a combat jump into Korea. I met a bunch. It was the history book of warfare that was still alive, and those men they were amazing to meet those guys. I was actually a Ranger student, and we had to set up for the Ranger Hall of Fame while we were in holding pattern to start our phase 1. So it was great. Just meeting these men who had far less technology, far less training, far less of everything, than I ever had, and yet went through, far greater situations. My wife, you can't be successful in the Army and have somebody who doesn't support you in it. It's very important. My wife was a great Army wife, which is one of the reasons why I decided, between my body and wanting to see my kids and making sure that my kids, for me, it was my personal choice. I want my kids to know, I want to see my kids develop at these different ages. And I was missing some of my older child, and I was getting some of my younger child, and I wanted to kind of be able to see those things. And first and foremost, my faith in God.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. That was truly great. I did have one more question for you, but I do have 5 audience questions. I did want to get to those, get those answered. So I'm just gonna ask them in the order that I received them. We have one question here from Cadet Bento. He asks, what was the hardest part of Green Beret selection for you?
I guess a cop-out would say the whole thing. um, learning how to work as a team. You are put in scenarios where you have to work, and you're pushing, a Jeep with no wheels, or things like that, and you're working with, obviously it's not an impossible task, but learning all of a sudden to try to gel with some guys that, alpha male, if you're the sheepdog, as they often refer, that's what they're looking for in a psychological makeup. They're looking for the sheepdog who, if you're working with all these different personalities, sometimes you have to learn how to work together. You can't all be, the one calling the shots. It has to be a teamwork kind of thing, and they throw you headfirst into it. So that was probably, there's a lot of frustration because you're trying to, move a Jeep with no wheels and you got almost no equipment. How do you get this done? You got to come up with, and you have time hacks. So that was probably be it.
Thank you. We have another question, actually from Cadet Venencia. He says, over the summer, I will be taking part in a 2-week internship at Robin Sage, acting as an insurgent that the potential Green Berets will be linking up with. Do you have any advice for those 2 weeks?
Soak it up. Learn as much as you can. When I was in Ranger school in my platoon, we had we had 3 or 4 Green Berets in my platoon. Maybe it was 3. And I just was really impressed by those guys. I remember in second phase and mountain phase, we were, in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains in Dahlonega, Georgia. We were trying to get communications going back to command, and we couldn't. And it was, the RTO that day was not the Green Beret who was a communication specialist, but he stepped up and was like, let me take it over. Let me show you something. And boom, and a little bit like MacGyver, the next thing you know, we have a makeshift antenna, and he's doing this, he's doing that, and we have communications. I mean, they just, the knowledge that these guys bring to the table, even at that level, even at that point of Robin Sage, there's a lot they have already learned that they're going to be doing and using and utilizing. So pay attention to that. It's a very realistic scenario. Going back to where I was talking about being in a real world situation where you're dealing with somebody and you want to call them out on a humanitarian or a human rights violation. That's one of the things you learn in Robin Sage. You're surrounded. I have you outgunned, and you're in a very vulnerable situation. They're going to put you through a scenario like that, or maybe not you necessarily, but the students. And how do you react to that? Do you ruin relationship at a minimum, or get your team killed? So it should be a fun experience for you. It's a very realistic thing. There were many years ago. I want to say it was the late 90s. There were two students that were killed. They were in plain clothes. They were driving a truck. They were pulled over by a local police officer. And usually most people know that, there's a role playing going on. And they thought he was role playing, and he just saw weapons in the back of the truck, in the back seats of the truck, and didn't, I don't know, for whatever reason, didn't suspect that they were the students. And he pulled him out of the car, like had him get out of the vehicle because he saw the weapons. And then they jumped him and tried to, take him, and then he shot and killed him. So, it's a very real scenario. I know there was debate about, well, do we make this less real? But then you really ruin the training. And that was a debate, like I said, like 20 years ago. Next question.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
So this one is from anonymous person. They say, who was the best leader you saw in action over your decade with the Army? Why were they most memorable, or what was that thing that stuck out to you the most?
I mean, there were several. Again, I'll go back to my platoon sergeant and PL. I'd probably say my friend Mark was an excellent. He was my senior on our team. He was an excellent leader. I was his junior. He was always calm, cool, and collective. And I've seen him in action in things where, again, going back to being able to compartmentalize where, all right, this just happened, and I can't, there'll be time for mourning later. What I have to do is focus on the mission at hand, because it's the most important mission. So we just got to compartmentalize and move on and worry about those things later. And he was, very cool like that. Just seeing him in action was great.
Mr. Hill, we are running close for time, but we do have a couple more questions. I don't know, maybe if you had some time to stick around and seems like there's 3 more questions, and answer them briefly for the audience.
Sure.
So this is again from an anonymous person. You mentioned that SF officers stay in their ODA for 2 years, if lucky in that light. What's the best way to earn the respect of your team as a SF officer?
Well, this will go for any officer. This will go for anyone. We have a saying in the Army, it's you have to respect the man, but you don't, or I'm sorry, you have to respect the rank, but you don't have to respect the man or woman. So, what does that mean? Well, I have to respect the person who outranks me, right? If it's an officer, I have to salute them and all those things. But there's no greater honor than the people who are, that you lead, who respect you more as a person than just because you have a rank on you, that outranks them. That's the most, that's what's most important, whether it's an SF officer or whether you're, a platoon leader in armor or artillery. It doesn't matter. Or down on AG row, doing tax prep. Your people should respect you, and that comes from having a high level of morals, high integrity, honor, duty. I laugh when I got out and I'm in business and I'll walk into somebody's office and I'll see those motivational posters on the wall, and I think it'll say something like courage, and it'll show somebody scaling a mountain. There'll be another one that says honor, and it's like, okay, we are held to those things in the Army. We are held to those things. They mean something to us. We don't need to be reminded by hanging a poster up on the wall about honor or courage or duty. We live those things and we're held to those things. You're going to be taking an oath here soon that we are held to. That's a standard we're held to. I'll give you an example. Politicians take, and I'm not trying to go down a political road, but politicians take a very similar oath to office as we take, right? If not the same one. Slightly different, but very similar. And yet, if we breach that oath, we're held to that. We're held to whatever punishment is due to us, and we rightly should be. Politicians look at that oath as merely a ceremonial thing, that they take to taking that particular seat, that office. They're almost never held to when they fail that oath. If they were, we'd have a lot more being kicked out and replaced. So that's not really so much, again, I don't want to go down some political road, but if anything, what I'm trying to say to you guys is you have a lot riding on your shoulders. You're getting ready to join the most powerful military in world history. You have some big boots to fill. And as somebody who, I'm not in the Army anymore, but I care about who goes in my Army. I do care. And I've talked people out of going in because they just didn't have the right heart. They didn't have the right, they just thought it was like, oh, well, they'll make me a stud. Now you need to go in being a stud. You need to be going in with the right mindset. They've watched too many movies and played too many video games. So for any officer, it doesn't matter if you're special operations or it doesn't, having a high level of integrity and honor, believing in these things, believing in these things and holding each other to those standards. That's what's most important. That's what makes a quality officer. That's what makes a quality NCO. That's what makes a quality, enlisted person as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hill. We have another question from Anonymous. They say, you briefly talked about the various roles in an SF team. Can you talk a little bit more about the 18 Zulu, 180 Alpha, and 18 Alpha roles and responsibilities?
18 Zulu, okay, so I believe that's the team commander. The responsibilities, are, as a team commander, they are responsible for the team. I mean, and making sure for the training that we're being held to a high level and standard. I can tell you more about my designators and my specialties more than I can about a team commander. So sorry if I'm failing on that question.
That's fine, Mr. Hill. And then the last question I have from the audience says, as a religious man, how did your faith help or perhaps hurt you over your time spent in the military?
That's a great question. It didn't hurt me. It definitely helped me. You know, I remember in training one time, we were doing a layout and my Bible fell out. And one of the instructors saw it and said, "Oh, I think you're going to need that here." And it's, you know, especially in combat, again, in one hand, they're looking for guys who can compartmentalize and not be thinking about the fact that they're getting shot at and more thinking about the job they have to do and maybe returning fire. But it also helps to know that I have no control over what happens to me. I mean, outside of doing something stupid and on my own, I have no control over that. And, you know, to sit there and worry about things that are out of my control and leave it in the hands of God, it's, you know, that helped me get through a lot of things.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Hill. Last question before we wrap it up. This is a question from me to end it out. What advice would you give the future junior leaders that will be joining our United States Army?
So I've been kind of peppering it all the way through this. You know, it's again, leading by example. Your people should respect you more than they respect your rank. Not that they don't respect your rank, but they should have a higher respect for you than they do the rank itself. If your attitude is you like to be reminded that you're an officer or that you outrank somebody, you're wrong. You're doing it wrong. Don't punish honesty. I'll give you a quick story. There was this young Private Hill. He was tasked one day with doing a PMCS, pre-maintenance checks and services, on a couple of the gun trucks. And the turrets on the Humvee sometimes are hard to spin. They get bent, the metal gets bent, the bearings get bad, whatever. So having a piece of equipment on there adds a little weight, makes it a little easier. Instead of signing out a 50 cal, I decided to just go and get a TU system from a tow missile system and mount that on. And I knew I was using a collar that, you know, you're taught from day one, never use a collar where the locking mechanism doesn't have the safety latch. I was using one that was old, the safety latch was missing, and that just keeps to make sure that the locking mechanism doesn't pop open. Well, I used it. I was probably a E2 or an E3 at the time. Mounted it on the gun truck. I had another guy with me. He was inside spinning it, and I was standing there, and I see the whole TU system for the tow missile system flying off. And you know, it's like slow motion. And you wish you can, you know, make that diving catch. And of course, it's heavy, so you would have, and it ends up breaking. And I had the launch tube on there, which is made out of Kevlar or something. And, you know, so you know, I report it, and it's not looking good. It's like, hey, you might have to pay for this, right? So I go up, and the XO and the company wanted to talk to me, and he said, listen, so if you want, you can plead not guilty. We'll do an investigation, blah, 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 blah. And I said, why would you do an investigation only to find out it's my fault? This is my fault. I should not have used that collar. I knew better. And he's like, okay. And that was, you know, I was more worried about ruining my reputation and ruining my integrity than I was having to pay for it if I had to pay for it. A few days go by, I'm sweating, you know, bullets about this thing, and it comes by, and I'm meeting with the company commander, and he said, did you learn a lesson from this? And I said, yes, sir. And he's like, all right, as long as you learned a lesson from it, you know, and that was it. I didn't have to pay for it. But again, I explained to them, you know, why do an investigation only to find out it's my fault? Why would I, you know, it was my fault. You know, punish me, you know, and in this case, you know, they didn't punish me for being honest.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. So that's all we have for today. Again, I want to say thank you, Mr. Hill. It was nice seeing you, nice having you on. I know the cadets definitely appreciated it. And thank you for everything you have done for this country.
Thank you, guys. I really do appreciate you having me on here and you know, go out there and do great things and do well.
Excellent. Thank you. And to our audience, for more information on our podcast, you can find it here on our Steel Battalion Media. And for any other information for the remainder of the semester, please go ahead and find the recording. Thank you, Mr. Hill. You can stay by a couple minutes or you can head out as the audience filters out.
Okay, thank you.